This video is going to be quite a lot longer than usual. I've made it with the idea that someone who is not yet experienced at soap making might want to see all of the steps involved. So just about the only thing not on here was lining my mold. I recently posted another whole video on how I do that. So you can see the whole process. For people who don't want to watch all of that or who are experienced soap makers, I will list in the description below the various timings of where each part starts, and you can skip to wherever you'd like to. I have in the past posted videos of corner pour soaps, and one of the earliest videos on soap making I ever posted was using clays as colors. So here are some pictures from that batch. That's a 2017 video. I'll put the link to that in the description below. Since then, I've made many batches of soap using clay as color. Those are all clays that you see there, except for the blue, which, depending on the batch, is either woad or indigo powder, often with some white kaolin clay added. So this is woad in the blue in these. And then for dark red, I often use Australian red reef clay. For orange, I use French red clay, sometimes steering that in a yellow direction by adding some Brazilian gold clay to it. Yellow, I almost always make just with Brazilian gold clay. Green, I use French green clay. Occasionally, I'll add some green mica or something else to that to make it greener. And then blue, as I say, is usually a white kaolin with either woad or indigo powder. And then purple is Brazilian purple clay. So I like the look of these. Also the pink is French rose clay. It occurs to me, though, that they're all quite dark. And so what I want to do today is make a soap that is lighter than these. This one was a little lighter because it had more yellow in it. Those others were all cured soaps. This is a close-up of the slab right after pouring and making the pattern, so it's still semi-liquid. So what I'm going to do this time is use less of the colored clays and then dilute them all with white kaolin to make more pastels. I'm also going to not use the dark red stripe at all, so it'll go pink, orange, yellow, green, blue, purple. And I'm also adding a white stripe between the green and blue. So hopefully that'll give a nice looking soap as well. This is the recipe I'm going to be using. It's a 68-ounce batch, and I'll be using castor oil, lard, palm kernel oil flakes, and sunflower, high oleic sunflower oil, and beef tallow. No particular reason for using the palm kernel rather than coconut, other than I haven't tried that before, so I'm trying it. I am, as I often do, using some sugar as well as sodium lactate, and then I'm using Nature's Garden's black cherry fragrance oil as the fragrance. These are what I'm going to use for my colors. As you'll see there, all of those have at least a teaspoon of white kaolin clay in them, and then usually half a teaspoon of something else, just to give the various colors. So as I said earlier, it's going to go pink, orange, yellow, green, white, blue, purple. My recipe calls for 733 grams or milliliters of water total, but I'm going to use less than that to make my lye solution because I want to save out 100 grams to dissolve the sugar, and then I'm also going to need to moisten my clays, and I'm going to allot 15 milliliters or grams per clay. I'm using 7 different colors to do that. So there's another 105 grams. So what that leaves then is 528 grams that I'll use to dissolve the lye. When I actually moisten the clays, it's likely to take more than that on some of them, and I'll just add extra water above the recipe. But this is how I'm dividing up the official amount of water in the recipe. The part of soap making that is most likely to be dangerous in any way is working with lye. Lye is sodium hydroxide. It's the same material as drain cleaner is made out of. You really don't want to get that on your skin, and you certainly don't want to get it into your eyes. And so it's important to cover up to protect yourself. I'm using some goggles for these. Sometimes I just wear my glasses and I'm very careful, but goggles are probably wise. I think beginning soap makers, though, are often terrified of lye, and that may stop them from even making soap. And that's kind of silly. We deal with things in our everyday lives that are potentially deadly. We pump gasoline into our cars. We don't throw matches at it and we don't drink it. We have electrical outlets all over our houses. We don't go around holding bare wires in our bare hands and poking them in the outlet. We know better than that. And so we live our whole lives totally safely with those potentially deadly things. The same is true for lye. As long as you handle it correctly, it's not going to hurt you, but you do have to handle it correctly. So the idea would be to put water into your container. I've got it on a balance here, and I want to put the water in first, and then I'm going to add the lye. You never add you never add water to dry lye, because the instant water and lye come together, it becomes very hot. And so if you're applying water to dry lye crystals, it will tend to pop and fizz and spray little bits of that dissolving lye up onto your face. Obviously not a good thing. So by having a fairly large volume of cool water here, and then slowly pouring the lye into it, I avoid that problem. The one thing that then remains, of course, you don't want to dump that on you, but also as that lye solution gets hot, it gives off a very caustic, bad smelling fume, which you really don't want to breathe. Again, you don't want to get that in your eyes. And so it's important to do this in a well-ventilated area. Some people mix it up even outdoors or under a like in the kitchen hood, if your fan above your stove actually vents to the outside of the house. Somewhere like that where you can really get good ventilation and then stay upwind of where those fumes are going. I want 528 grams of water here. And one way you can speed up the process of cooling that lye water back down, because you usually want to soap with it fairly close to room temperature, is to use ice as part of the water component. So these are ice cubes made with deionized water. You could use distilled water in case it's not tap water. And I want 528 grams total of water. So I'm going to use almost half that volume as ice. So there's 201 grams of ice. I'll bring that up now to 528 with deionized water. I make my soap in a classroom laboratory, so it has running deionized water. So there I have I've actually got 532 grams. I'm not going to worry about those few extra grams, that's fine. And then I need 269 grams of lye. So I'm going to reset my balance for 0. Some people measure their lye into a different container and then add it to the water. I usually add it directly to the water. I realize there's the potential for getting the amount wrong, but if you're pretty careful, you don't do that. The advantage to doing it this way is I don't have another container with raw lye in it that I'm going to have to clean up and keep safe. So 269 grams. And I'm going to just kind of tap the sides of this so it sprinkles in slowly. When I get close, I'll slow down. There's 260. And there's my 269. Now, what I'm going to do, you could stir this with a plastic or stainless steel stirring device, a spoon or whatever. I'm just going to swirl it. If I get into fumes, I'm going to back off, but I'll just swirl this till it dissolves. And of course the ice will melt as we go. I can feel that the solution is quite warm, almost too hot to touch despite having that ice in there, but it's not nearly as hot as it would have been had I not used the ice. This room is well enough air conditioned that it's keeping the fumes pretty well away from me. And of course you want to be careful as you're swirling here that you don't slop it out onto yourself. If that ever happens, you stop making soap immediately and you go and wash. Fortunately, I tend to be pretty careful about that. So that's cloudy but pretty well dissolved, and so we'll let that sit now and cool closer to room temperature. Here are my colorants that I'm using. They're all clay, except in the case of the blue where I'm using some woad powder. So for pink, I have a teaspoon of white kaolin and half a teaspoon of French rose clay. For orange, I have again a teaspoon of white kaolin. That's true in all of these, always a teaspoon of white kaolin. And then a quarter teaspoon of Brazilian gold clay and a quarter teaspoon of French red clay. For yellow, I have half a teaspoon of Brazilian gold clay. For the green, I'm using French green clay, and because it is not a very bright green, I'm not using any white kaolin in this one. Instead, I'm using a full teaspoon and a half of French green clay. This is also going to be the most annoying one to mix up because French green clay is chemically and structurally different from other clays, and when you try to mix it with water, it tends to turn into a lumpy, slimy mess. So you really have to stir it a long time. For white, then, I'm using a teaspoon and a half of white kaolin. For blue, I have a teaspoon of white kaolin in there, plus about a quarter teaspoon of woad powder. Woad does not like to mix with water. It'll just float to the top dry. And so in addition to the water to moisten that clay, I'll also add a little bit of oil from my recipe to it to moisten the woad before I put the soap batter in. And then for purple, we have a teaspoon of white kaolin plus a half teaspoon of Brazilian purple clay. I have now moistened the colorants, and I ended up using closer to 25 mils in most of them of water. So that's going to be a little wetter than the recipe calls for, but I think that's okay. The clay absorbs a lot of that. So here's the pink, the orange, the yellow, the green, the white, the blue, and the purple. And those should all look quite a lot better after they're mixed with soap batter. For fragrance, I'm using Nature's Garden's Black Cherry Fragrance Oil. A really nice scent, and doesn't accelerate or separate or rice. It's pretty well behaved. They say it discolors slightly to a light cream. Well, in these colors, I don't think that's going to matter. So I need 84 grams of it. I'll just set that aside until I'm mixing up the soap. I am ready to mix my oils. So I'm going to do the solid oils first. For lard, I need 771 milligrams. that's the lard. And then the palm kernel flakes. $3.85. The reason I'm using so much palm oil flakes is I'm not using any coconut oil in this recipe. No particularly profound reason for that. I just decided to try a soap that uses palm kernel oil as the cleansing aspect rather than coconut, just kind of as a little experiment. I have, as I say, no particularly good reason for doing that. Now, beef tallow, I need a $3.85. And because it comes in a bottle, I have melted it, at least partially, in the microwave. So those are my hard oils. I will now take this to the microwave oven and melt it before I add my liquid oils. I have my solid fats melted now, so I'm going to add the liquid oils. For castor oil, I need 96 grams. Again, this can be dangerous to pour it directly, so you don't want to go over, but just be careful. And then for high oleic sunflower, I want 289 grams. And that's all of my oils. And because the fragrance oil is said not to be at all accelerating, I'm going to go ahead and add it right now. So the oils are ready. The sugar that I want to add needs to be dissolved before it goes into the lye water. So I have been heating 100 milliliters, 100 grams of water on a hot plate, and it's nearly to boiling. So I'm going to use 4 teaspoons. This is a plastic picnic spoon that actually holds about 2 teaspoons, so I'm going to use 2 of these. The amount of sugar you use is not critically important, so if you're a little over or a little under, well, who cares? It won't make any difference. So I'll dissolve that, and then I'll pour that into my cooled lye solution. After this soap is poured and the pattern is made, we could just let it sit out at room temperature and it would harden and become perfectly good soap eventually. We could also insulate it, and it will on its own become quite warm because the saponification process is said to be exothermic. It gives off heat. So the soap will warm up. And if you insulate it really well, it'll get hot enough to go into what's known as the gel state. There is a physical change in soap if you get it hot enough that it goes into this jelly-like condition known as the gel state. And it doesn't really change the washing ability of the soap later. But with certain colorants, and especially if you're using clays, you'll get much clearer, brighter colors if your soap thoroughly gels. Well, we can guarantee that by purposely putting the soap for a while in a fairly hot area. And that's known as CPOP, which stands for cold process oven process. where you set the soap into a very warm or slightly hot oven. Most American kitchen ovens have as their minimum temperature 170 degrees Fahrenheit, and that's a good temperature to use. That's the same as 77 Celsius. And so when I CPOP a soap, I usually do that for 2 or more hours and then let it cool down naturally. And you get a nice even gel when that happens. And with these clay colored soaps, then you get very bright, clear colors, and that's exactly what I want to happen. So I plan to do that today. My oils are at 100 Fahrenheit. My lye water is at 113. I have already added the sugar solution and the sodium lactate to the lye. So I think I'm ready to mix this up. It's important if you're going to make a pattern soap to be sure you have everything ready to go. So I have a spatula, a ladle, a chopstick for stirring. I have all my colors, got my mold. This is going to be a corner pour, so I need some sort of a prop to lift one corner. I'm using a wooden spoon for that. I have paper towels. Hopefully I've not forgotten anything. So I'm going to hand whisk this, and as I often do, if it takes a long time, I may speed up or edit the video not to include all of that. For a corner pour, you want your soap really well emulsified so it doesn't separate, but it really does not have to be even at light trace. I like pouring it while it's still quite thin. And with the amount of both lard and sunflower oil in this recipe, it should be quite slow moving, which is a goal. So I'll ladle this out into my colors. I don't really care if these volumes for the colors are not identical, but I'd like to get them fairly close. Surprisingly, this batter is almost at a light trace now. I hope it doesn't move much faster. So I'm going to pour these in rainbow order with white between the green and blue. This is the side of the mold that I have propped up. And I put some extra tape here in case I leak some soap over the edge, which I almost always do. So I'm just going to pour these, as I say, in rainbow order. reason I'm putting the white between the green and blue is that when I've used woad in the past and put it next to green, the green tends not to show up. Everything turns blue. So I'm hoping to get some separation of those colors here with a good clear green and a good clear blue. So there's one cycle. Definitely thickening up here, so I'm going to pour fairly quickly. Two cycles. If you find that one pitcher is emptying faster than another, you can kind of adjust that in the next round so you'll run out of all your colors at about the same time. Fourth cycle. I always try for 6. So on the 5th one, I'll use up about half to 2/3 of what I have left. Just about finish these. I may actually finish some of them on this cycle. I'll move that over just a bit. Dregs, I think, for another quick cycle here. I'm not going to worry about getting these pitchers real clean at this point because I need to keep moving. I've mentioned this in other videos, but woad changes color as the pH changes, so it'll be interesting to see after this soap hardens. Tomorrow, that may be a completely different shade of blue. I'm hoping it'll be a little brighter. Okay, so that is the pour. Take this out. And now I'm going to swirl this, starting out with radial stripes from the pouring corner. Some complicating stripes out here where they got farther apart. And then I think I'll use a semicircular swirl to finish complicating the pattern a little more. spray that with alcohol. Breaks any tiny bubbles that are present. It also reduces the chances for soda ash. So here is the freshly poured soap. Here is the soap after it came out of the oven. It has been cut, and I will separate the bars and shave the tops to clean them up a little bit, and then get back with the final look. Here is the soap about 20 hours later. It certainly came out pastel. The lines are not as sharp as I'd like them to be, and usually when that happens, that means that the batter probably should have been poured when it was a little thicker. But in this case, it was thickening up so quickly there that I'm kind of glad I poured it when I did. These then are some sides. The one on the left is a side that was against the mold wall. The other two are cut sides. And then these are bottom sides of the bars. The one on the far right is the natural bottom that was against the floor of the mold. The other three have been shaved slightly to remove some of that really muddy color at the base. So I think I'm not displeased with them. They're really not what I expected. I would like to have sharper lines, but I think it's kind of an interesting look, and it's certainly a lot lighter than the previous clay soaps that I've made.